Hello and Assalamu alaikum. I am Adil Sultan and welcome to this special segment where we would be analyzing the military implications of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, and whether or if there are any implications, especially the military implications for South Asia and especially Pakistan. And to deliberate on this important matter, I have a panel of experts: Lieutenant General Nadeem Khalid Lodhi, he is a former Defence Secretary, and Professor Dr. Salma Malik, who teaches at Department of Defence and Strategic Studies, Adil University, Islamabad. So straight away we start. Are there any, General Lodhi, are there any lessons from the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia that could possibly be applicable for South Asia? So any key takeaways from
Thank you very much. I think there are already many lessons, and probably till the war ends we will be having more lessons because the war, there are lessons before starting the war, the phase, then the war itself. And so even if we talk of military lessons, the first lesson of course is the reiteration of what Clausewitz said, that war is a continuation of policy. So wars are fought for political reasons and economic reasons. So the military commanders must know that what is the objective of this war, because it is not capturing of land or capturing of certain places, not that alone. It must have the ultimate impact which is required. So I think that is the first lesson. And the second I would say is, as I said, that you need to know that before starting a war you've got to create conditions like if you want to make a coalition. For example, Russia and China, they reiterated each other before it really started, that we will be standing with each other in all circumstances, something like that. And of course the West was also they were also making their coalitions. Then you have to think about the logistics, you have to think about the timings, the duration and all that. I am just talking about the pre-war things. And during the war, of course, terrain, because we saw that sometime the Russian tanks went into an area which was not suitable. It was slushy. So terrain and weather effect they probably did not consider. And also even the sociology of the people, whether they will resist this aggression or not, aggression or whatever we say, because Russians, they call it an operation, special operation, and others they call it a proper war and all that. We will talk about it later on. But then the notion that nuclear countries cannot go to let us say make conventional wars is also needs to be reviewed, because NATO is a proper nuclear having nuclear weapons, and Russians also. And we know that of course Ukrainians are fighting, but actually it is a clash between NATO and Russia. So this also needs to be reviewed, whether this thing holds true even today, that countries having nuclear weapons will not go to war, or not likely to go to war, conventional war I am talking about.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's very important, because it was generally considered that in the nuclear age, in 21st century, probably conventional wars have become obsolete. But now what we have seen, something started what Russia termed as special military operation, but it has turned into an all-out war between two countries where one of the country has nuclear weapons. So there are implications. So if we go back to this, the main issue between Russia and Ukraine, and how to contextualize in South Asia, because in the backdrop it's the territorial disputes. Both sides have their different perspectives, and likewise in India-Pakistan scenario, the territorial disputes are outstanding, and we have seen the number of conflicts and the crisis between these two countries. So is there a possibility of such a situation if we take lessons from Ukraine and Russia for South Asia?
True. Thank you so much, Dr. Adil, for giving me this opportunity, and to FES for this platform. 2-3 things are very important. Number one, of course, we need to see that before coming to South Asia, that this is a time of changing dynamics where we see the resurgence of certain countries, which the US is taking as challenging its so far supremacy, if you call it a hegemony, but supremacy in the global politics. US perceivably, as many people are predicting, that its time cycle of the American century is drawing to an end. So these are, if it is a last hiccup, but you cannot call it a last hiccup because they are still very strong. But at the same time, we're also seeing that this is the time of coalitions. And between the termination of the Cold War to date, what we had seen was a phase where the alliances, the flavor of alliances had shifted from purely Cold War centric military alliances to economic integration models, comprehensive security. So the collective security had been supplemented by comprehensive security. But now what we see happening in Europe, in South Asia, or the greater South Asia region, the Indian Ocean as well as the Pacific Ocean, that once again there is this tinkling of military alliances coming back. AUKUS, Quad. Then if you look at Europe, NATO is trying to make its presence felt now in Europe, because the very fact that the ISAF, NATO plus so many countries, its mandate in Afghanistan and few places was really questionable. So let's go back to Europe and re-examine how NATO works. And then of course the European Union's shared security model, the thing that they're tinkering with. So you can actually see that there are countries which are shifting how they would like to engage themselves, emerge, take chances of the fractures in the global scenario, and how they would like to work on it. If we look at South Asia, there are three things that we see. Immediately at the eve of the Russian-Ukrainian war, people started to say, especially in Pakistan, that if Ukraine had maintained its nuclear potential, they would not have been drawn into this conflict and the blatant aggression coming from Russia. However, we cannot generalize to unique case studies, whatever the similarities may be in that case study. We have seen that after 1998, India and Pakistan have been through several highs and lows under the nuclear umbrella. So there is a sufficient threshold to resort to limited conflict, and this is a classic critique against deterrence and the nuclear weapons as well, that despite saying that nuclear weapons provides you with this comfort zone that you will not tinker on the conventional front, countries do that. They have their pressure valves through which they kind of release that aggression factor. So then what do you do? How close to comfort you are, and where do you cross that threshold where a purely conventional strike can convert into something more than that? But also the fact that one more similarity is that the use of the point General Sabit also pointed out, the use of non-kinetic means to fight the war. The media, how the media is shaping opinion, how the media is manipulating various images in wars and what is happening. Already they have decided, depending who is dominating the global media, as to who is going to be the victor, who is going to be fighting a moralistic war, despite not giving importance to the fact as to what made Russia do what it eventually did. And a similar pattern can be seen in case of South Asia, where India has been declared as the best boy in the picture, despite all the human rights violations, despite all the aggression, what is happening in Kashmir, what is happening inside India. So there are so many things that you can feel as to how the global political sentiment is actually shaping the war scenario before the conduct of physical aspect of war.
Absolutely. I think they're very relevant points, and there are similarities that we can draw lessons from. I'll come back to the specifics about the South Asian dynamics, but let's talk about from where we started. What Dr. Salma also mentioned, that these patterns of changing alliances, there was a thought that probably major powers, they're shifting their competition towards Indo-Pacific region, which was Asia-Pacific. Now they term it as Indo-Pacific. But this war in Ukraine, that has again shifted or diverted attention of the major powers, especially the United States in NATO countries. So how do you see these dynamics affecting, because now United States is also committed in Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific, it sees China as a major adversary, but at the same time it has its commitments within NATO and how it is helping Ukraine and other major powers in NATO. So this do you think that there is going to be any impact, because United States is not wholly committed in NATO at this moment? It has to take into consideration what is happening in the Indo-Pacific.
Yes. So, I think that there is a linkage between their policy of Asia Pacific and this Ukraine war, and they know that Russia is an ally of China, and instead of taking on China first, they probably thought that let us take their friend first. This is just my understanding, and that is what they have done, and it will definitely weaken Russia, because fighting a war is not a simple thing. It will weaken them economically, and also this internal dissension which is now taking place once they have mobilized the forces and they are asking people, because they conscript the people. So, there is a sort of resentment in the people. So, that is also a weakening of a country. So, I see this link between this. So, ultimately they will come for, once they have tried to invoke China, you must have seen that by sending their senators and all that to Taiwan, but probably that did not work. They will try again, because in my own understanding and analysis, American strategists, they must be thinking that before China becomes too strong militarily, it should be engaged now. But Chinese, they have their own policy, but let us see. I always keep telling my Chinese friend that you may not be interested in war, but the war may be interested in you. So, it is not a one sided decision that we do not want to go to war. It can be actually thrust upon you. It has nearly been thrust on Russia, the way that they will take them to NATO and European Union and all that. So, let us see how it works out, but probably the larger war, a portion of that larger war has started. How it actually engulfs the entire region or Indo-Pacific also, or it will be a standalone operation and then later on there will be a break in between and then the next phase will come, I do not know, but I am quite sure that Americans will not allow China to become formidable. They will like to take them on before that time comes.
Thank you very much. Now, let's move to something which is generally considered as intangible, the role of leadership in the conflicts. We saw between Pakistan and India during Balakot crisis, how the leadership, both sides, India and Pakistan, they reacted to that crisis. And how leadership is affecting where President Putin is trying to assert his credentials, and President Zelensky, he has already established because of his leadership role, and that is how the nation also supported and the other countries are. How important is the role of leadership in future wars once we talk about South Asia, taking cue from how the leadership in Ukraine and Russia have taken their stances?
Doubtlessly, it's a very fascinating read. I mean, when you're looking at the hardcore tanks and aircrafts and all, and then there's something very important on the sideline, which is actually doing all this mathematics, and those are the leaders and the decision makers, how they rise to the occasion. One must also keep one thing in mind when we are looking at the American leadership, and I'll start with that and come down to even South Asia, if I'm allowed. So, during Trump's time, we saw that he had a very hands-on approach. It was a very crude and crass approach. Many people did not appreciate it, but he put all the cards on the table and he said what he had to say. He was very non-politically correct about several things that he did. So he said, I'm bringing the war to you and I'm going to fight with you, and you are this and you are that, and people were like, you don't talk like this. World leadership was a bit comfortable with him. They also knew that at the domestic level, many of the things that he's saying is not going to get the type of constituency that he aims to achieve. The fact that the US is strong wasn't really coming across with the strong statements coming from Trump. But when we look at Biden, a person who has come with a bag of positive legacy left by Obama, a statesman par excellence, who did far more damage to international peace and security after getting a Nobel Prize than anyone else in his shoes did, not even George Bush Jr., right? But no one looks at Obama as an aggressor or as a bad doer. So he left a very positive image. And Biden was fulfilling that. But when you look at Biden as a person, then you realize several of the things that he's doing is also to give this message that I'm a strong leader of the USA, United States of America. So it's also question of egos and also a question of targeting different audience at different level, the domestic audience, the international audience, the global leadership and all. For Putin, he was always this. And the images that are coming, riding a lion or a tiger, swimming in cold water, I mean, like, you know, this is how you're playing with the perceptions in the media. But then you see Zelensky, an ex-performer, performing to the best. So I think if we take out all the brass tacks from this particular case study, it's a fascinating read of how these politicians are playing to the camera. And Zelensky has the confidence that there is an entire strong West supporting him, which reminds me of this old novel in which a girl, when she was going for sati and everyone is looking at her, she was a queen and the king had died and she was the queen consort. So she was very happy till such time the first flame hit her, and then she realized this is reality. The flames have hit Zelensky. I'm not questioning his strength, but the fact is that there's a lot more. So when you let go of these leadership egos and perceptions and image building, they are the people who are suffering, people who are dying. And for Putin also, this is a question where he has to really prove himself, because it's the aggressor, so the leadership has to really go all out at all costs. But the entire cost is going to be carried out by the people, and that is a very, very heavy cost. And that is something we neglect as an intangible, the collateral of the war, a term which America has so conveniently coined. And in that collateral, the entire universe can get destroyed. Would that also mean that as a worst case scenario, Putin may start using nuclear weapons? One can only wish that they don't. If you bring it to the South Asian model, here you have Modi, who has very effectively, at every time he felt that his popularity was going down several notches, kicked up some new fiasco with Pakistan, managed to do several false flag operations, and as the end of that, he has at least won 2 rounds in the election. And you never know. I mean, for the Pakistanis, we keep on praying that something new doesn't strike his crazy mind and he would do that. But then if we are not undergoing an active conflict, what it has done between India and Pakistan is that in an India which had a very strong, vibrant, secular civil society, now it is a mark of proving your nationalistic fervor by having a tilak and doing all that mandir rounds and all the masajids are going down and the mandirs are coming up. Kids as young as kindergarten are being taught through tableaus how to bring down a masjid and do all that stuff. So it is creating an intolerant society which is going to be so militarized and become so extremist that we will never really see what has stuck us. So we need to also prepare for the fact that where the leadership is doing what it is doing for the international audience and to win favors within the target audience at home, the impact that this leadership craziness has on common people.
Absolutely. I think that's very fascinating. As we say, war in the end is all about politics. It's continuation. So the politicians sometimes, for their personal political interests, take the nations to a brink where probably there is no return. Whatever Dr. Saba said, General Lodhi, I would just like to take your views on how the leadership, the Pakistani side and Indian side reacted during Balakot crisis, because as she was mentioning about the nuclear rhetoric, that was a limited crisis where surgical strikes and there was no need for nuclear signaling or brinkmanship, but we saw that sudden shift, escalation from the Indian side. So those are some of the lessons that I would like you to share your views, how leadership can create more problems for the region, individual leaders.
Before talking about the specifics, I will just talk about the principles which the leader must keep in mind whenever there is a war. The first, of course, is their ability to rally the public and the nation, to make them mentally ready and physically ready to go to war. That is one. The other is that they must have the political objective in their mind. Why are they doing it? What is the purpose? And now coming back to our scenario, you know, our problem was simple. I mean, Pakistan's problem was simple because we were in a defensive mode. We were saying that we will defend ourselves, and we said very clearly that we will react if there is any crossing of border or any aggression. We will react. So that made it simple. But I think there was more rhetoric from the across the border, and that probably did not give the face saving which a power like India should have, because they were talking about Gilgit-Baltistan, they were talking about Azad Kashmir, and they were talking about bigger things, and we were only talking about a limited defensive maneuver. And then whatever they did was very small as compared to the rhetoric. Whatever we did was probably equal to or more than what we were professing. So that way I think our leadership, whether it was military or political, and basically we are talking about the political leadership, so we did understand very well about our military potential. We did understand very well about our political objective, which was to react and to let the world know that we will not take any nonsense. So I think that way, although you can say that I am biased being a Pakistani, but I think our leadership was more aware of their objectives. They were more aware of what they were supposed to do, and we can include the military leadership also in that. And at the end, probably we had a good face to show to the world, and probably Indians, they were not that comfortable, you know, facing the world question and all that. So that way I would say that we did well, rallying the you know, public for the cause, allowing the military component to do whatever was to be done, also restraining them not to do what was not to be done. So I think if we look at the overall situation thing, our leadership fared much better than the Indian.
Thank you. I think the point important, the how leadership plays on the sentiments of the public is important, and that's the how leaders they behave. But an important consideration once we analyze our history of crisis with India and what is happening between Russia and Ukraine, the public support also. If you see 65 war, 71 war, 99, 2001 and 2, and even 2019. So what are the similarities or some of the lessons that you can predict for the future crisis in India and Pakistan? How important or crucial is public support, especially looking at how public in Ukraine is supporting their leaders? So how do you analyze that?
Dr. Adil, I would say one thing. There is one aspect which is the natural public support, the patriotism that you have in you, right? And that is something which no one can infuse in another person. And then there's a manufactured nationalism and several other things in which you use images, and the enemy images is the most viable to tell people what is happening. Allow me to just say one thing, that when Kargil happened, and then later on several other things, false flag operations were happening in India, several people in the south who had never ever even heard where Pakistan, there was a country called Pakistan in the south of India, and then there were people who didn't really know that where did Kashmir exist on their country's map. They ask each other, it's like they're asking the younger generation, what is happening, what is being talked about? And they said, well, there's this place, so and so is happening. And then you find body bags returning to your homeland from a place which no one knew about. The second psychological impact is where you go for elections and 40 young police officers or security forces people, men and women, their photos outnumber the candidate's name or out-image the candidate's name or whatever. So you put this war in the face of people who are not primary stakeholders, and that's how you change the country's opinion. That's how you make a peaceful nation become belligerent, start identifying an unknown enemy who is extremely evil, right? So this is something manufactured. Everyone in India has become an anti-Pakistan stakeholder. No negotiation on Kashmir, no rational talk on Kashmir. Pakistan is not the right country. So this is the sentiment which Modi Brigade has spewed in the entire country. When we look at Ukraine, what we find is that there's something, a small country outmatched by a huge country, and that country ends up becoming aggressor. Already you have a divided population as part of the old Russian doctrines, in which then the fault lines, ethnic fault lines, become highly dominated, and it becomes intolerant. So these things then end up making situations so ugly that the recourse for rational discussion and all go down the drain. But in terms of, say, the future scenario that you were saying, majority of the leadership will come from these people tomorrow. And when you have this baggage of an animosity and a live evil adversary, how can you actually think rationally? And many a times, despite what Atal Bihari Vajpayee's past history was in the India-Pakistan conflict scale, as an old man, he actually wanted peace because he had seen the worst side of the conflict. So it takes a lot of prudence and a lot of bad sentiment and too much of loss that is irrecoverable and precious loss to come to this realization. So why shouldn't we invest in societies which are most peaceful? Having said that, that's a very idealistic talk. I know none of this will ever happen, because this is exactly how countries go for conflict and the latent conflict that is part of this deal. But the fact is that Pakistan and Pakistani leadership and the public, where there is no loss of valor or lessening of valor when it comes to responding to an aggression from India, the fact is that anytime Pakistanis try to negotiate with India, or any other country in any conflict scenario negotiates with the other country for the fear that the escalation would have too many costs and it would retard economy, so many other things, it is taken as a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of weakness, I would say it's a sign of prudence, that there are several other recourses than war to settle these problems. But war is inflicted by leaders who think that this is their calling card.
Absolutely. The strong leaders, they can take a nation to war also, and they can use that political capital to prevent wars also. You use this term manufactured nationalism. That's very interesting. And in once we are talking about manufacturing nationalism, the role of media becomes very important. In Ukraine-Russian war, we have seen how media, where we don't have much from the Russian side, there's Western media is there, and we know mostly the stories from the Western. And if we see in India-Pakistan scenario during 2019 crisis, that's the recent one, or the previous 2016 limited crisis that India claimed to have launched surgical strike, land-based surgical strike, and how that rhetoric was used by the Indian leadership to build that perception, and sometimes perceptions become stronger than realities. People started believing, yes, there was a land-based surgical strike, whereas Pakistan denied there was none. But this media part, this was played very well, rather dangerously by the Indian leadership. And how do you see, General Lodhi, the future of this perception building of manufactured nationalism, where the emotions on both sides, India, Pakistan, are very high, and you trigger a debate, then it becomes uncontrollable. And we have seen the media, how responsible or irresponsible are these on the both sides.
Yes, that is very important. I think one important lesson from which you have already brought out in a way, that the Russians and the Chinese, they'll have to think that if they are talking about hybrid conflicts, so media plays a very important role, and Western media and American media is far ahead as compared to Chinese and Russian media. So how will they make inroads and how will they spread their message? They have to think about it. In our case, although the Indian media was more in size, in volume and all that, but probably they went wrong in the contents. Their content was based on too much of falsehood, which became so easily discernible. What we did was that we whatever we said, we showed, we proved it. So I think although we were a smaller media and probably our media operations were also small, but I think they were more effective, maybe handled by more proficient and people who knew how the media works, because you can only add fancies to an extent. You cannot manufacture the falsehood in a way that to tell the people that it is true. I think that was one big difference why our media was more effective as compared to them. Now, talking about this nationalism and especially this manufactured nationalism, I think this is the duty of good political leader, that to make the nation understand the actual potential which is there. Okay, you can have a latent potential, all right, that in future you will be a great power and all that, but presently whatever your potential is vis-a-vis the enemy, that must be I think more objectively told to the, at least to the people who can understand. And second, I think we should not misread one thing from this this Ukraine war, and that is Ukraine has the sort of support which they have, the logistic support, the weapon support, we are not likely to get in any future war. So if we think that a smaller country like Ukraine can face Russia and we try to apply that on our scenarios, we should be careful, because okay, Chinese will, maybe they will be helping us, but I do not know what will Chinese do, whatever we are doing nowadays, what will be the reaction of that. But one thing I would like to, one point I would like to make, that yes, peace is the ultimate and desirable goal, and we should all work for peace. But we have seen that whenever you go in the mode of appeasement, or you don't stand along your red lines, you don't stand firm on what you call your red lines, if they are crossed again and again, and you keep appeasing and you keep showing the weakness. One is the weakness that may not be a weakness once you are vying for peace, but once you go to the appeasement mode, then it affects your deterrence, then it affects the outcome of war. And my own assessment is, and I can be wrong, that why we keep on asking this question, that why the world is not worried that Pakistan and India are two nuclear states, they were eyeball to eyeball and having a lot of firing going on, and still they were not worried, in my opinion, and I can be wrong because I am not an academic, that it was our defensive posture and our defensive statements vis-a-vis the Indian offensive statement, that the world realized that nothing big is going to happen. Because if we were also aggressive in our stance, probably world would have been attracted in this region, that maybe they can go to war. But they were very clear that the way Pakistan is behaving, the way Pakistan is giving statements, the way Pakistan has withdrawn everything, the way they have retracted on their earlier policies, well, for whatever reason, that is a separate debate, they were quite clear that there can be no big war between these two neighbors. So I think that has to be seen, that in the pursuit of peace, you should not become so docile that the international community thinks that you will not fight, and even your enemies start thinking, even your own people, they start thinking that you are giving in. This is very important. Your own people must have confidence in you. The enemy must be deterred by your actions and statements, and the international community must know that they will do whatever they say.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important lesson. If you don't stand for yourself, nobody is going to listen to you. President Zelensky, he stood up, he showed courage. People might argue or debate on this issue, and a state should never expect that others from outside will help. Yes, they might for their own interest, but in the end, the national leadership of the country, if that country is not willing to stand up to an aggressor, probably there would be less support from the outside also, and people would not pay even attention also. So there should not be any illusion that Pakistan should be expecting that the outside countries would come to Pakistan's help against a bigger aggressor. Unless we stand on our own, only then we can.
And history is also testimony to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now let me shift towards something, the impact of new technologies, emerging technologies. Because of late we had been hearing about a lot in the literature, the artificial intelligence, cyber, hypersonic weapons, new missiles, all these things, space-based assets, they are going to fundamentally change the character of warfare. And Russia is a technologically advanced country. It has that capacity. Ukraine, relatively, yes. But do you think that these technologies, Dr. Salma, have been used, and to what extent? And then we'll come to South Asia, where this technological asymmetry is growing between India and Pakistan. So how it can shape this regional conflict or potential conflict between India and Pakistan. But first, give me a sense, all that talk about the impact of new technology, how it has shaped the outcome of Russian-Ukrainian conflict or war.
Right. Just allow me a quick word on your previous point. I totally agree with you that no one will stand for you or would kind of supplement your effort. Many a times we see that, oh, such and such a country had the need of the Western powers and they came to their help. Today in Ukraine, US is doing it, yet the fact is that Europe also felt that US is not doing enough. So now they have started contemplating upon an EU shared security model other than NATO. So you find that despite old friendships and all, things undergo a lot of change. You can be very strong in your words, but you are checkmated if you don't have the type of economic viability. And even if you want to have a solid defense, the question of valor of an individual soldier can never be the valor of an individual soldier can never be questioned, because they are very they are defending the country with their heart and soul, but they can only do that if there is a strong economic lifeline which is helping them face all the challenges. And that brings me to a point, the last point that you said about the growing asymmetry. For the moment, India and Pakistan may not have that much of a gap, but the very fact that India is part of several alliances which need not be purely anti-Pakistan, they are as India as a regional monitor, proxy China, etc., bilateral, multilateral, which provides India with those added eyes and ears and hands that can hurt Pakistan very badly. And not only in the face of those alliances, the alliance partners are providing India blatantly with the type of weaponry and extended control over world military power, but there are also those hidden allies in this picture who are providing them with that technology and access to that technology. So if we say that, the US strategic partnership, Comcasa, this thing, that thing is providing India with that added edge, we also need to see that the US is also opening windows and doors for India in the non-US market of no contact weapons, cyber technology, Israel, this thing, that thing, who are in the front line of weapons manufacturing, platform manufacturing, and so many other things. Plus the fact that India has played its cards so prudently that it is even at good terms with Russia, right? So they are never asked to choose sides. Why? Is it that the Indian soldier is better than Pakistan? No, not at all. The only question is India has a huge fat purse, which it keeps flashing at the world, and the world keeps dancing to its tunes. The Americans are thoroughly frustrated with India when it comes to negotiating on their terms. But the very fact is that India knows that I am the flavor of the month and I can play my cards very well. And they are doing it to the hilt. Hats off to them in that term. So where we look at the fact that your media perception, what you say, how you say it, I totally agree with General Saab on those points, but the very fact is that none of this can work unless you have domestic strengths that support your statements. Otherwise, I mean, your adversary for Pakistan, this binary with India is not so troublesome as the larger picture in which the global support system is there for India rather than for Pakistan. And if we look at an India-Pakistan warfare, we can never count on China to be a third party, because the semantics are very different. China cannot be a third party. It is a party to the conflict. So any one of us who say that for Kashmir China will come, Aksai Chen, Shakskam Valley, trade, China's strategic culture. So there's so many things that affect this equation. But about the cyber technology and all of that, today we may not have that much of a gap. It's a growing gap, but look at ourselves 10 years is small, 20 to 30 years down the lane. It's a very different equation. And the US is intentionally creating this gap because they want Pakistan to be extremely negligible when it comes to challenging India militarily. They know that Pakistan's military, its nuclear weapons are its strength. Despite all the other negatives that we may have, we have these true formidable strengths that we can bank on. But the type of arming is being done for India to counter China. They very well know that Pakistan is hurting and it's suffering, but they are turning an intentional black or whatever you call it, blank eye to this because they want India's hegemonic superiority in this region, so that India, no one can challenge India. And there's only one country which can challenge India in this region, that is Pakistan.
True. I'll come back to you mentioned about the China's involvement, but this question I'll pen for now. Let me come back to General Saab. Sir, the use of drones, how did it impact Ukrainian-Russian war, ongoing war? We saw how these were very effective against armored. And if we take those lessons where we see in our region how drones are being developed and by India and Pakistan both. So what are your takeaways in terms of drone warfare, cyber, or any other AI-based weapons that can be potentially used in a future conflict?
Right. I think the first lesson is that in Ukraine war, the war is not total so far. I mean, we know that air force is not being used in that sense, naval forces are not being used. So basically it is some of these technologies which we talked about, drones and some precision weapons and the ground forces. So one thing Pakistan must learn is that this thing can happen to us also, that India may avoid our strength and go for our weakness. For example, in our war games we have seen that India would like to engage our air force first because their air force is very large, and we always say that okay, we will not allow them to do that. The moment they try to just engage our smaller force, our equal forces or the better forces will also go. But I think we are in a precarious situation from one point of view, and that is to use this cyber, drones, UAVs. You need to have collaboration with somebody who has good space technology, which can give you surveillance information. Fortunate for India that they have got very many agreements with the Americans as far as their surveillance capability is concerned. So they would know pinpointedly where our forces are moving, where our vehicles are moving, and where everything. We might be having some understanding with China, but I am not very sure whether it is of that level or not, because Chinese are not very extrovert in talking about agreements and all that, military agreements. Although I am of the view that this is the time that they probably need to go into that. They should also show that they have their partners and they have agreements with all these things. So I think this is going to be our Achilles heel, that these technologies which we are talking about, whether it is in cyber or in space technology or drones, UAVs, probably Indians will have much more access to these technologies and probably support even during war as far as the surveillance is concerned from some countries. We might not be having that. So we'll have to think. I mean, everything has, you can always find an answer to that. Two things I would like to mention. One, that once we talk of full range deterrence, full spectrum deterrence, that can not only be imposed through nuclear weapons. Full spectrum deterrence means that you need to deter the enemy at all levels, whether it is LIC, I mean below the conventional level, in the conventional field and beyond, or we'll have to change our strategy. As the French said, that they said that we have a tripwire strategy, that the moment we know that we are being attacked, we'll go nuclear, and we'll not wait that how much force has come and who has attacked us and all that. They said this much information is enough that we have been attacked, and we'll go new. Of course, it is very difficult for Pakistan in the international environment and all that, but we need to see that while we are up against a very formidable enemy, a very big one with a lot of international support, so what should we be doing? Probably we need to review our strategy. Of course, we are not here to discuss that, but another point which I would like to make is that at times we have seen, whereas we are seeing in Ukraine technologies versus technologies, and there is a lot of clash of such hardware, but in Afghanistan we saw the opposite, high tech against low tech, and still they managed it. But then we should not take a wrong lesson from the Afghan war, because we will be fielding our armies which are normal conventional forces and not unconventional forces like Afghan Taliban. So if somebody thinks that if they can fight, we will be able to fight, I think that would be a wrong lesson. So we need to ponder on all these things, that okay, if technology works, what do we do? If we need to avoid it, what do we do? And we will have to find some answer. Today I would say that we are comparatively vulnerable in Indo-Pak scenario.
Thank you. I think the important thing that you mentioned about the spectrum, that we full spectrum deterrence, the terms that we call, these are dynamic concepts. As new technologies evolve, this can change, and more technologies would have to be involved in these things. A point about what Dr. Salma was earlier saying about the possible role of China in this. The interesting debate that these days is happening is how to redefine this region. Some people have started using terms Southern Asia. Probably that is to bring China into the India-Pakistan deterrence dynamic, which is essentially dyadic in nature. So I think I agree with you that by redefining or coining these new terms, the justification is being built where probably India doesn't want to engage directly with Pakistan unless China is brought into it, and China will never engage with intervene in India-Pakistan dyadic relationship because it has own security concerns. But lastly, before we conclude, just to round up, how this conflict in that region will shape up regional security questions like Russia, India, Russia, Pakistan. How do you see the future relationship?
I think one big change would be the economic world order. I'm talking about the Ukrainian campaign, because I can see that the sanctions which America was so fond of putting on various entities are now diluting, because they have overextended their extension, and people are trying to find out the answer to that also. And of course, it will also have an impact that how technologies are used, and how a small country fights a larger country. Also, as I said earlier, that the conflict parties, which is West and America on one side and China and Russia on the other side, that will also become very clear that which side has become weakened on that. In our case, I think for us it is a precarious situation. I'm talking about Pakistan, because what has happened is that United States is still the superpower. We had a checkered history with them as far as the relationship is concerned. We call it transactional or whatever we call it. Chinese, they don't want to get into any military conflict for the time being, and we have been having a very good relations with China, very stable and all that. Now there is a small gap before China really attains that stature where it can come, we can say, neutralize America in military, economic and political areas. There is some time in between. It can be 10 years, it can be 15 years. We are caught up in that problem, that if we now side with America, which I see is happening nowadays, the Chinese may get antagonized at why it is happening. If we try to side with China, Chinese are not ready to fight with us the way Americans would like to help India. Although I think that this latest American again say a little attraction towards Pakistan is because of Indians intransigence, or Indians, I would say, free foreign policy, that they have probably not totally towing the line which the Americans wanted. So, probably Americans are thinking that we need to come back to Pakistan. But Pakistani leadership must realize that what is good for us in the long run, we can make some interim arrangements, all right, but we need to have our focus on the long term interest of Pakistan. It cannot be discussed in this small period, but probably some other time Dr. Salma and myself and you can sit down and find out the solution for this time gap solution which we need immediately. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may.
Yeah, please.
Sorry. I partially agree with General Saab. Look, there are three things that one need to assess. China and the US are very different in their views of the world or how they want to tackle the world. Where the US may take immediate offense, like a freshman, about whom you want to talk to,
Right.
who is your best friend, Chinese don't do that. Their strategic culture is very different. The point General Saab earlier alluded that the West is bringing war to China. China is not taking the war to them. They keep on provoking them, they don't get provoked. Yet the fact is that the US in this scenario knows that China has the teeth. If it's not exposing them, it may do that, and they just want it to do it for once so that they get an excuse and they enter the Taiwan Straits and the South China and the Indo-Pacific, the investment that they're doing, right? So that factor is there. But you see, with China we have this comfort zone that even if we warm up to the US on a military or a diplomatic front, they will not consider choosing sides. So long as we are doing good work where Pakistan-China relations are. Again, a bit bordering on the idealism, but the fact is that it depends on the quality of Pakistani leadership and diplomacy, how they maintain this balance. India has done that all along. In its 75 years, they have played so well with both US as well as Soviet Union, now Russian Federation. We have that capacity that we can do that. And China also understands Pakistan's compulsions as to, given our pivotal position, as to why we need the USA for several aspects. We need to do this balancing, otherwise we have a nuclearized Indian Ocean. We have a militarized Indian Ocean, and that is going to become highly detrimental for us. We will be drawn in a conflict of not our own making, with India doing the additional kinetic and non-kinetic attacks from all fronts, applying the Mandala theory and all that crap that they believe in. So that factor is there. So we really need to see into this, and the point that you talked about, the triad, the China, Russia, the China, US, India and Pakistan triad, one must also keep into account that every great power has a cartography of its own making. And how the Chinese look at it, that is evident from the BRI. How the British and then the Americans look at it is evident from the South Asia, Southern Asia terminology and coupling Indo-Pacific and all that stuff. So we need to go back, revise our textbooks and figure out how do we position ourselves in the future scenario. And that's the answer to the problem for Pakistan.
Great.
Thank you so
One
much.
thing, if you want, one sentence, if you allow me to say, this famous question, American question, you are with us or against us. Indians can very easily answer this question because they are not bound. They can say we are with you also and we are with others also. We have a problem. If you look at our situation, economic situation, what IMF has done to us and what FATF has done to us, probably this time, this is my feeling, I can be wrong. This time Americans are not giving you that space that you are with us or against us. The Chinese thing which Dr. Saib was talking, China, there's no problem from China. The problem is from America this time. They are telling you, in my opinion, I can be wrong, they are telling you very forcefully that you have to decide you are with us or with China.
Well, the Americans
Thank you.
always said that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Salma Malik and General Lodhi, for sparing time and sharing your views. The whole objective of this program was to understand what is happening in Russia, Ukraine, and how it can have implications for other parts of the region, especially in South Asia, where the relationship between India and Pakistan are not good. We have a long history of crisis and wars, and this region is nuclearized. So in this time, any conflict around the globe has global implications, and Russia-Ukraine conflict war, if it continues to spiral up, it can have global implications, and especially for a region like South Asia. So that objective was to bring in the military lessons from Russian-Ukrainian war and to analyze how to take preventive measures where we can prevent such conflicts in our region. Thank you for watching us, and bye-bye.